see you. It's wonderful when I get to see you. I spent a lot of time trying to get this book. It's all the way from Virginia, but we are going to look at the Roswell Report. Case closed. It has a lot of pictures and stuff, but I think we can make it work. We'll get through it together. Maybe not all of it. It's very lengthy, but we'll get through it. I'm just dying to see what it says. And then here is my shout out. Here's my painting. This I painted myself. This is the Christmas decorations on my uncle's house. He likes to put up a lot of decorations, so I'm finally getting around to painting the pictures for him. I like to work small myself, not big. I used to work big, but I don't have the room for all of that. Once the painting is finished, you have to put it somewhere. I don't have any more wall space. And this is my product placement. I bought a new thing. I bought it at Burlington Coat Factory. Usually I would buy this at the Dollar Tree, but the Dollar Tree is closing in my neighborhood. But at least we have Burlington, and this only costs maybe $3, $4. So a little bit more than the Dollar Tree, but I think it's better quality. At least the handle is better quality. So that's that. That's the only way I can really get my back cleaned without getting water all over the bathroom. Let's just dig right into this Roswell report. I think we've been having some strange things falling out of the sky recently. I personally think it's space junk because there's an awful lot of satellites and other things that we put into space that eventually do come back to Earth. They don't always burn up in the atmosphere as they come through. Sometimes part of it will burn up, but it has to land somewhere. And I think we've been very sensitive to what we're seeing on radar because of the balloon thing. But I think the balloon thing is explained in the book also. So we're going to find out. And remember SQ3R. We want to look at the whole book. So this book has already been rebound. So I presume it must have been in a paperback type of form. And there's the front cover. Case closed, headquarters, United States Air Force. And it says, the cover picture is a solarized image taken from a U.S. Air Force motion picture of experiments conducted for Project High Dive. This image, unsolarized, appears on page 34, figure 37. So that is a good picture. Isn't that crazy? So let's get to see here. We will turn the page. And we will read. This was first published in 1963. Hello, good to see you. Aha, good to see you in Pakistan. Good to see you. Hi. I'm so happy to see you. We're going to read a story about UFOs, about aliens, about creatures from outer space. And we're going to find out if it's true or not. I don't know. I know people that have seen a UFO. I know more than one person that had a UFO experience, and I personally have never seen one, but I believe it because my friends have seen it. I believe my friends. I don't think they were making up their story. I believe them. I met Bud Hopkins several years ago. He's since passed away. He's also an abstract expressionist. That's why I met him. I met him because of being an artist. Hello, Caballero. Good morning. I met him because he's an artist. I'm an artist, so we met through the art world. But lo and behold, he's had alien experience, and he wrote several books that were made into movies. Bonjour, mon ami. Yes, you are my friend. So we'll read the foreword. I think it's important to read some things like this. So, the Roswell incident has assumed a central place in American folklore since the events of the 1940s in a remote area of New Mexico. Yes, je vous en prie. Yes, je t'aime. Because the Air Force was a major player in those events, we have played a key role in executing the General Accounting Office's tasking to uncover all records regarding that incident. Our objective throughout this inquiry has been simple and consistent to find all the facts and bring them to light. If documents were classified, declassify them. Where they were dispersed, bring them into a single source of public review. In July 1994, we completed the first step in that effort and later published the Roswell Report, Fact versus Fiction in the New Mexico Desert. This volume represents the necessary follow-on to that first publication and contains additional material and analysis. I think that with this publication, we have reached our goal of a complete and open explanation of the events that occurred in the Southwest many years ago. Beyond that achievement, this inquiry has shed fascinating light into the Air Force of that era and revitalized our appreciation for the dedication and accomplishments of men and women of that time. As we celebrate the Air Force's 50th anniversary, it is appropriate to once again reflect on the sacrifices made by so many to make ours the finest air and space force in history. That was by Sheila E. Widnall, Secretary of the Air Force. And and in fact, this painting, this is my uncle's home in New Mexico. Not near Roswell, I don't think, but near Albuquerque, but just the coincidence anyway. Just that I finished that painting recently. Okay, let's see. We'll read a guide for readers. This publication contains the complete report as submitted to the Secretary of the Air Force. The exceptions are the statements found in Appendix B due to Privacy Act restrictions, and by request, the addresses of the individuals making these statements have been deleted. This volume is divided into 2 sections, 8 subsections, 11 sidebar discussions, and 3 appendices. Section 1 examines alleged events at 2 locations in rural New Mexico. Section 2 examines the alleged activities at the Roswell Army Airfield Hospital. Appendix A is a table listing the launch and landing locations of test equipment for U.S. Air Force scientific research projects, High Dive and Excelsior. Appendix B is a collection of signed sworn statements based on in-person interviews conducted for this report by U.S. Air Force researchers. The exception is the statement of Lieutenant Colonel William C. Kaufman, which was not sworn due to the equipment failures at the time of interview. Appendix C also contains transcripts of interviews of alleged witnesses presented by UFO theorists. The interviews of Gerald Anderson, Alice Knight, and Vern Malteus were excerpted in their entirety from unedited interviews used to prepare the video Recollections of Roswell Part 2, 1993, and appear courtesy of the Fund for UFO Research. The interview of Mr. W. Glenn Dennis was provided by the interviewer Carl T. Flock. The transcript of the interview of Mr. James Ragsdale was provided by Kevin Randall, the co-author of The Truth About the UFO Crash at Roswell, in which direct quotes from this transcript appear. A selected bibliography of technical reports and how to obtain them are found on page 221. For additional information on this subject, see Headquarters, United States Air Force, the Roswell Report, Fact versus Fiction, and the New Mexico Desert. And that is from the Washington, D.C. U.S. Government Printing Office, 1995. Okay. And the author is Captain James McAndrew. He serves as an intelligence application officer assigned to the Secretary of the Air Force Declassification and Review Team. The Pentagon, Washington, D.C., Captain McAndrew was the co-author with Colonel Richard L. Weaver of the Roswell Report, Fact versus Fiction in the New Mexico Desert, 1995. The first Air Force work on the alleged Roswell incident, he participated in the declassification of the Gulf War Air Power Survey, 1993, and served special tours of duty with the Drug Enforcement Administration and High Intensity Drug Trafficking Area, HIDTA, Task Force. He holds a BS degree with honors from Metropolitan State College, Denver, Colorado, and is a native of Washington, D.C. Wow, that is just fascinating. So We will glance at the table of contents so we can know what we're getting into. It's a very long table of contents, so I will just read the bold statement. So forward, guide for readers, introduction, flying saucer crashes and alien bodies, reports of bodies at Roswell Army Airfield Hospital, conclusion, and the notes. Anthropomorphic dummy launch and landing locations is part of Appendix A. Appendix B, witness statements. Appendix C, interviews. Selected bibliography of technical reports, index, tables, figures. Okay, that's quite a lot of figures and all. So we will get through this together and we'll get to the bottom of it because the truth is out there. The truth is out there. Introduction. In July 1994, the Office of the Secretary of the Air Force concluded an exhaustive search for records in response to a General Accounting Office inquiry of an event popularly known as the Roswell Incident. The focus of the GOA probe, initiated at the request of New Mexico Congressman Stephen Schiff, was to determine if the U.S. Air Force or other U.S. government agency possessed information on the alleged crash and recovery of an extraterrestrial vehicle and its alien occupants near Roswell, New Mexico in July of 1947. Reports of flying saucers and alien bodies allegedly sighted in the Roswell area in 1947 had been the subject of intense domestic and international media attention. This attention has resulted in countless newspaper and magazine articles, books, a television series, a full-length motion picture, and even a film purported to be a U.S. government alien autopsy. The July 1994 Air Force report concluded that the predecessor to the Air Force, the U.S. Army Air Forces, did indeed recover material near Roswell in July 1947. This 1,000-page report methodically explains that what was recovered by the Army Air Forces was not the remnants of an extraterrestrial spacecraft and its alien crew, but debris from an Army Air Forces balloon-borne research project codenamed Mogul. Records located describing research carried out under the Mogul project, most of which were never classified and publicly available, were collected, provided to GAO, and published in one volume for ease of access for the general public. Although Mogul components clearly accounted for the claims of flying saucer debris recovered in 1947, lingering questions remain concerning anecdotal accounts that included descriptions of alien bodies. The issue of bodies was not discussed extensively in the 1994 report because there were not any bodies connected with events that occurred in 1947. The extensive Secretary of the Air Force directed search of Army Air Forces and U.S. Air Force records from 1947 did not yield information that even suggested the 1947 Roswell events were anything other than the retrieval of the Mogul equipment. Okay, now we are in section 1, titled Flying Saucer Crashes and Alien Bodies. The most puzzling and intriguing element of the complex series of events now known as the Roswell incident were the alleged sightings of alien bodies. The bodies turned what, for many years, was just another flying saucer story into what many UFO proponents claim is the best case for extraterrestrial visitation on Earth. The importance of bodies and the assumptions made to their origin is illustrated in a passage from a popular Roswell book. Crash saucers are one thing and could well turn out to be futuristic American or even foreign aircraft or missiles, but alien bodies are another matter entirely and hardly subject to misinterpretation. The 1994 Air Force report determined that Project Mogul was responsible for the 1947 events. Mogul was an experimental attempt to acoustically detect suspected Soviet nuclear weapon explosions and ballistic missile launches. Mogul utilized acoustic sensors, radar reflecting targets, and other devices attached to a train of weather balloons over 600 feet long. Claims that the U.S. Air Forces recovered a flying disc in 1947 were based primarily on the lack of identification of the radar targets, an element of weather equipment used on the long Mogul balloon train. The oddly constructed radar targets were found by a New Mexico rancher during the height of the first U.S. flying saucer wave in 1947. The rancher brought the remnants of the balloons and radar targets to the local sheriff after he allegedly learned of the broadcasted reports of flying discs. However, following some initial confusion at Roswell Army Airfield, the flying disc was soon identified by Army Air Forces official as a standard radar target. From 1947 until late 1970, the Roswell incident was essentially a non-story. The reports that existed contain only descriptions of mundane materials that originated from the Project Mogul balloon train: tinfoil, paper, tape, rubber, and sticks. The first claim of bodies appeared in the late 1970s, with additional claims made during the 80s and 90s. These claims were usually based on anecdotal accounts of second and third-hand witnesses collected by UFO proponents as much as 40 years after the alleged incident. The same anecdotal accounts that referred to bodies also described massive field operations conducted by the U.S. military to recover crash debris from a supposed extraterrestrial spaceship. A technique used by some UFO authors to collect anecdotal corroboration for their theories was to solicit cooperating witnesses. Hey, how are you? Wow, info. Good to see you, Matt. Hi, good to see you, Matt. Good to see you. Yes. No, thank you. You're very kind. A technique used by some UFO authors to collect anecdotal corroboration for their theories was to solicit cooperating witnesses through newspaper announcements. For example, one such solicitation appeared in the Socorro, New Mexico Defensor Chieftain on November 4th, 1992, on behalf of Don Berliner and Stanton T. Friedman, the authors of the book Crash at Corona. This request solicited persons to provide information about the supposed crash of aliens. Ah, good to see you. Good. Crash of aliens. In response about the crash of alien spacecraft in the Socorro area. So it's just giving you pictures of the article that they put in the paper. In response to the newspaper announcement, two scientists central to the actual explanation, it is so fascinating, isn't it? Actual explanation of the Roswell events, Professor Charles B. Moore, a former U.S. Army Air Force contract engineer, and Bernard Gildenberg, retired Holloman AFB Balloon Branch Physical Science Administrator and meteorologist, came forward with pertinent information. Oh, good for you. Well, that's fascinating. I'd love to hear what you found out. If you make a video of it, leave me the link. Okay. According to Moore and Gildenberg, when they met with the authors, their explanations that some of the Air Force projects they participated in were most likely responsible for the incident, they were summarily dismissed. The authors even went so far as to suggest that these disgusted scientists were participants in a multifaceted government cover-up to conceal the truth about the Roswell incident. Wow. Since many of the Roswell accounts and allegations were collected by irregular methods, and are not specifically documented, the series of events as alleged by UFO theorists has become very complex and requires clarification. Yes. Therefore, the following section will briefly examine some of the more confusing elements of the Roswell story, specifically the multiple crash sites. Yes, rifts in time, that's true. Therefore, the following section will briefly examine some of the more confusing elements of the Roswell story, specifically the multiple crash sites and complex scenarios, in order to facilitate an objective analysis of actual events. 1.1, the crash site scenarios and research methods. Okay, Las Cruces, okay. The crash sites from 1947 until the late 1970s, the Roswell incident was confined to one alleged crash site. This site, located on the Foster Ranch, approximately 75 miles northwest of the city of Roswell, was the actual landing site of a Project Mogul balloon train in June 1947. Oh, thank you. Wow, thank you very much. The Mogul landing site is referred to in popular Roswell literature as the debris field. In the 1970s, the 1980s, and throughout the 90s, additional witnesses came forward with claims and descriptions of two other alleged crash sites. One of these sites was supposedly north of Roswell. The other site was alleged to have been approximately 175 miles northwest of Roswell, in an area of New Mexico known as the San Agustin Plains. What distinguished the two new crash sites from the original debris field were accounts of alien bodies. The scenarios. UFO enthusiasts have attempted to explain the obvious contradiction of multiple impact sites involving only one alien aircraft through the introduction of complicated scenarios. These scenarios have become increasingly convoluted since the proponents of each crash site must make allowances to have their flying saucer at the correct time and place. The actual Mogul balloon train landing site in early July 1947, in order to fit with the rest of the story, the actual Project Mogul landing site 75 miles northwest of Roswell lends credibility and, more importantly, established a time frame for the other accounts that include reports of bodies. Flying saucer enthusiasts used the documented presence of U.S. Army Air Forces personnel at the Mogul site in July 1947 who were there to retrieve the Mogul balloon train to provide the nucleus of unrelated and much later accounts that include reports of bodies. It must be emphasized that the claims of bodies only became part of the Roswell incident after 1978, when they were erroneously linked to the 1947 retrieval of Project Mogul components. In general, Roswell incident scenarios claim that a disabled alien aircraft momentarily touched down at the site 75 miles northwest of Roswell, leaving behind parts of the spaceship material that has been subsequently identified as components of a Mogul balloon train. To create the original debris field, the scenarios further contend that the damaged craft again became airborne and flew to its final crash site at either the location north of Roswell or 175 miles northwest of Roswell on the San Agustin Plains. Regardless of the dispute over the location, an element common to most scenarios was that, once recovered, the bodies were supposedly transported to the hospital at Roswell Army Airfield for autopsy. Also common to these theories is that the bodies were later shipped from Roswell Air Force Base to another facility, usually Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, Ohio, or a host of other facilities. This is another area of further disagreement among UFO theorists. for further evaluation and ultimate deep freeze storage. Research methods. In an attempt to untangle this collection of complicated assertions and determine if there was any validity to the reports of bodies, Air Force researchers faced the task of sorting through and examining anecdotal testimony of hundreds of witnesses. However, a large number of the accounts were eliminated by applying previously established facts to the testimonies. The July 1994 report to the Secretary of the Air Force clearly presented and documented these facts. A. The U.S. Army Air Forces did not recover an extraterrestrial vehicle, an alien. This conclusion was based on extensive research that included a thorough review of both classified and unclassified materials at record depositories, archives, libraries, and research facilities throughout the nation. Of the millions of pages of material reviewed, there was no mention of any activities that even tangentially suggested such an event. Additionally, former and retired Air Force members and civilian contract scientists were located and released from any possible non-disclosure agreements they may have entered into regarding past classified activities. This release allowed them to freely discuss with Air Force researchers or any other persons information related to this issue. These releases were issued at the express written direction of the Secretary of the Air Force. Interviews with these persons yielded no information supporting extraterrestrial claims or any unusual activities. B. The reports of bodies were not associated with Project Mogul. The Mogul balloon train was not designed to, nor could it carry passengers. Neither did it carry hazardous materials that would have caused injury, death, or mutilation to persons who may have come in contact with any of its components. C. Actual events, if any, that inspired reports of bodies did not occur in 1947. Based on extensive examinations of U.S. Air Force activities in 1947, no evidence was found to support allegations that the Army Air Forces was involved in any uncommon operations other than the retrieval of the Mogul balloon train in the Roswell area in July 1947. Examination of research and development projects, aircraft crashes, errant missiles, and possible nuclear accidents yielded no information to support a 1947 claim. In light of these documented facts, the hundreds of anecdotal accounts were reduced to a few. Eliminated were accounts that were likely descriptions of materials known to be part of the Project Mogul balloon train, and accounts describing transportation of these materials. From the remaining testimony, Air Force researchers developed the following set of working hypotheses to assist in identifying the actual events, if any, matching those described by the witnesses. Number A, due to the number of great detail provided in some of the accounts, it was likely that some events actually did occur. B, due to the many similarities of the two crash sites descriptions and considerable distance between them, it was likely that more than one event with similar characteristics was the basis for these counts. C, since the accounts of bodies at Roswell Army Airfield Hospital did not contain elements similar to the reports of the two crash sites, it was likely that this account was unrelated to the crash site accounts. The hospital account will be addressed separately in Section 2 of this report. The remaining testimony was examined with regard both to the facts and to working hypotheses to determine if there were common threads or links connecting any of the accounts. If similarities were found, the next step was to determine if they were related to an actual event. Finally, if there were actual events, were they part of U.S. Air Force or U.S. government activities? Okay, common threads. Careful examination of the testimony revealed that primarily witnesses of the two crash saucer locations contained descriptions common to both. These areas of commonality contain both general and detailed characteristics. However, before continuing the accounts, and were carefully examined to determine if the testimony related by individual witnesses were of their own experience and not a recitation of information given by other persons. While many aspects of the remaining accounts were judged to be similar, other aspects were found to be significantly different. The accounts on which the analysis is based were determined in a likelihood to have been independently obtained or observed by the witnesses. General similarities. The testimony presented for both crash sites generally followed the same sequence of events. The witnesses were in a rural and isolated area of New Mexico. In the course of their travels in this area, they came upon a crash aerial vehicle. The witnesses then proceeded to the area of the crash to investigate, and at some distance they observed strange-looking beings that appeared to be crew members of the vehicle. Soon thereafter, a convoy of military vehicles and soldiers arrived at the site. Military personnel allegedly instructed the civilians to leave the area and forget what they had seen. As the witnesses left the area, the military personnel commenced with a recovery operation of the crashed aerial vehicle and crew. Detailed similarities. Along with general similarities in the testimonies, there also existed a substantial amount of similar detailed description of the aliens and the military vehicles and procedures allegedly used to recover them. The first obvious similarity was the descriptions of the aliens. Mr. Gerald Anderson, alleged witness of events at the site 175 miles northwest of Roswell, recalled, "I thought they were plastic dolls." Mr. James Ragsdale, an alleged witness of the site north of Roswell, stated, "They were using dummies in those damn things." Another alleged witness to a crash north of Roswell, Frank J. Kaufman, recalled that there was talk, perhaps an experimental plane with dummies in it was the source of the claims. Additional similarities were also noted. Mr. Vern Malteus, a secondhand witness of the site 175 miles northwest of Roswell, described the hands of the aliens as they had 4 fingers. Anderson characterized the hands as they had 4 fingers. He also described the heads of the aliens as completely bald, while Malteus described them as hairless. The uniforms of the aliens were independently described by Anderson as one-piece suits, a shiny silverish gray color, and by Malteus as one-piece and gray in color. The date of this event was also not precisely known. Malteus recalled that it may have occurred around 1950, and another secondhand witness, Alice Knight, stated, "I don't recall the date." Witnesses of different sites also used the terms wrecker and 6x6 when they described the military vehicles present at the different recovery sites. One witness described seeing a medium-sized Jeep truck. Another witness described seeing a weapons carrier. A weapons carrier is a mid-sized Jeep truck type. The research profile. When the general and specific similarities were combined, a profile emerged describing the event or activity that might have been observed. The profile, which contains elements common to at least 2, and in some cases all of the accounts, established a set of criteria used to determine what the witnesses may have observed. The profile is as follows. A, an activity that, if viewed from a distance, would appear unusual. B, an activity of which the exact date is not known. C, an activity that took place in 2 rural areas of New Mexico. D, an activity that involved a type of aerial vehicle with dolls or dummies that had 4 fingers, were bald, and wore one-piece gray suits. E, an activity that required recovery by numerous military personnel and an assortment of vehicles that included a wrecker, a 6x6, and weapons carrier. Based on this profile, research was begun to identify events or activities with these characteristics. Due to the location of the site's attention was focused on Roswell Air Force Base, renamed Walker Air Force Base in 1948, White Sands Missile Range, and Holloman Air Force Base, New Mexico. The aerial vehicle assigned or under development at these facilities were aircraft, missiles, remotely piloted drones, and high-altitude balloons. The operational characteristics and areas where these vehicles flew were researched to determine if they played a role in the events described by the witnesses. Missiles and drones. Missiles and drones were determined not to have been responsible for the accounts. The areas where the alleged crashes took place were in all likelihood too far from the White Sands missile range. Missiles were equipped with a self-destruct mechanism that was activated if it strayed off course or out of the White Sands missile range. There was never a program that required a dummy or doll to be placed inside a missile or a drone. However, missiles were launched from White Sands carrying monkeys and other small animals aloft for scientific research. These projects were well documented, and none of these missiles landed near either of the two crash sites. Aircraft. Aircraft seem just as unlikely as missiles to have been responsible for the extraterrestrial claims as outlined in the profile. Although additional research revealed the significant role dummies played in the test and evaluation of aircraft emergency escape systems, these dummies were used on board aircraft and on high-speed test track at Holloman Air Force Base. However, aircraft test flights demanded strict adherence to established flight profiles over the instrumented portions of White Sands missile range. Many miles from the alleged crash sites, dummies used on the high-speed track remain in the immediate vicinity of the track facilities at Holloman Air Force Base. This geographical impossibility ruled out dummies that were ejected from aircraft and those used on the high-speed track as a cause of alleged alien sightings. Aircraft accidents will be discussed extensively in Section 2 of this report. High-altitude research balloons. The only vehicles not yet evaluated as possible sources of the accounts were high-altitude research balloons. Previous reviews of early research balloon flight records revealed that trajectories of high-altitude balloons were at times unpredictable and did not usually remain over Holloman Air Force Base or White Sands missile range. Many of the scientific payloads required recovery, so the data collected during flight could be returned to the laboratory for analysis. These characteristics seem to fit at least some of the research profile atmospheric sampling apparatus or weather instruments. The typical payload of many high-altitude balloons could hardly have been mistaken for space aliens. A careful examination of the instruments carried aloft by the high-altitude balloons revealed that one unique project used a device that very likely could be mistaken for an alien and anthropomorphic dummy. An anthropomorphic dummy is a human substitute equipment with a variety of instrumentation to measure effects of environments and situations deemed too hazardous for a human. These abstractly human dummies were first used in New Mexico in May 1950 and have been used in a continuous basis since that time. In the 1950s, anthropomorphic dummies were not widely exposed outside of scientific research circles and easily could have been mistaken for something they were not. Today, anthropomorphic dummies, better known as crash test dummies, are easily identifiable and are even the stars of their own automotive safety advertising campaign during the 1950s, when the U.S. Air Force dropped the odd-looking test devices from high-altitude balloons in its program to study high-altitude human free-fall characteristics. Public awareness and stardom were decades away. It seems likely that someone who unexpectedly observed these dummies at a distance would believe they had seen something unusual. In retrospect, when interviewed over 40 years later, they could accurately report that they had seen something very unusual. With the introduction of anthropomorphic dummies as a possible explanation for the reports of bodies, another element of the research profile appeared to be satisfied. Specific information that described the locations, methods, and procedures used to employ the dummies was required before any definitive conclusions could be drawn. To gather this detailed information, research efforts were concentrated on high-altitude balloon operations and the specific projects that utilize balloon-borne anthropomorphic dummies. We are up to test dummies by the U.S. Air Force, and here are some pictures of test dummies. Since the beginning of manned flight, designers have sought a substitute for the human body to test hazardous new equipment. Early devices used by the predecessors of the U.S. Air Force were simply constructed parachute drop test dummies with little similarity to the human form. Following World War II, aircraft emergency escape systems became increasingly sophisticated, and engineers required a dummy with more human-like characteristics. Parachute drop dummies. During World War I, research and development of the first U.S. military parachute was underway at McCook Field, Ohio. To test the parachute, engineers experimented with several types of dummies, settling on a model constructed of 3-inch hemp rope and sandbags with the approximate proportions of a medium-sized man. The new invention was soon known by the nickname Dummy Joe. Dummy Joe is said to have made more than 5,000 jumps between 1918 and 1924. By 1924, parachutes were required on military aircraft, with their serviceability tests by dummies dropped from aircraft. For this routine testing, several types of dummies were used. The most common type, shown in figure 17 and 18. Parachutes were individually drop tested from aircraft until the early stages of World War II, when due both to increase reliability and large numbers of parachutes in service, this routine practice was discontinued. Nonetheless, test dummies were still used frequently by the parachute branch of Air Materiel Command at Wright Field, Ohio, to test new parachute designs. Anthropomorphic dummies. The ejection seat had been developed and used successfully by the German Luftwaffe during the latter stages of World War II. The utility of this invention was realized when the U.S. Army Air Forces obtained an ejection seat in 1944. To properly test the ejection seat, the Army Air Forces required a dummy that had the same center of gravity and weight distribution as a human, characteristics that parachute drop dummies did not possess. In 1944, the U.S. Air Materiel Command contracted with the Ted Smith Company of Upper Darby, Pennsylvania, to design and manufacture the first dummy intended to accurately represent a human. The dummy had the same basic shape as a human, but with only abstract human features and skin made of canvas. 1949, the U.S. Air Force Aero Medical Laboratory submitted a proposal for an improved model of the anthropomorphic dummy. This request was originated by the renowned Air Force scientist and physician John P. Stapp, now retired colonel, who conducted a series of landmark experiments at Muroc, now Edwards Air Force Base, California, to measure the effects of acceleration and deceleration during high-speed aircraft ejections. Stapp required a dummy that had the same center of gravity and articulation as a human, but unlike the Ted Smith dummy, was more human in appearance. A more accurate external appearance was required to provide for the proper fit of helmets, oxygen masks, and other equipment used during the test. Stapp requested the anthropology branch at the Area Medical Laboratory at Wright Field to review anthropological, orthopedic, and engineering literature to prepare scientific specifications for the new dummy. Plaster casts of the torso, legs, and arms of an Air Force pilot were also taken to assure accuracy. The result was a proposed dummy that stood 72 inches tall, weighed 200 pounds, had provisions for mounting instrumentations, and could withstand up to 100 times the force of gravity, or 100 Gs. In 1949, a contract was awarded to Sierra Engineering Company of Sierra Madre, California, and deliveries began in 1950. This dummy quickly became known as Sierra Sam. In 1952, a contract for anthropomorphic dummies was awarded to Alderson Research Laboratories Incorporated of New York City. Dummies constructed by both companies possess the same basic characteristics: a skeleton of aluminum or steel, latex or plastic skin, a cast aluminum skull, and an instrument cavity in the torso and head for the mounting of strain gauges, accelerometers, transducers, and rate gyros. Models used by the Air Force were primarily parachute drop and ejection seat versions with center of gravity tolerances within 1/4 of an inch. Over the next several years, the two companies improved and redesigned internal structures and instrumentation, but the basic external appearance of the dummies remained relatively constant from the mid-50s to the late 60s. Dummies of these types were most likely the aliens associated with the Roswell incident. And here's some images I think are interesting. Oh boy, this is getting good. So we are up to 1.2 high altitude balloon dummy drops. From 1953 to 1959, anthropomorphic dummies were used by the U.S. Air Force Aero Medical Laboratory as part of the High Altitude Aircraft Escape Projects High Dive and Excelsior. The object of these studies was to devise a method to return a pilot or astronaut to Earth by parachute if forced to escape at extreme altitudes. Anthropomorphic dummies were transported to altitudes up to 98,000 feet by high-altitude balloons. The dummies were then released for a period of free fall while body movements and escape equipment were recorded by a variety of instruments. 43 high-altitude balloon flights carrying 67 anthropomorphic dummies were launched and recovered throughout New Mexico between June 1954 and February 1959. Due to prevailing wind conditions, operational factors, and ruggedness of the terrain, the majority of dummies impacted outside the confines of military reservations in eastern New Mexico, near Roswell and in areas surrounding Tularosa Valley and south central New Mexico. Additionally, 30 dummies were dropped by aircraft over White Sands Proving Ground, New Mexico, in 1953. In 1959, 150 dummies were dropped by aircraft over Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, Ohio, possibly accounting for alleged alien sightings at that location. A number of these launch and recovery locations were in the areas where the crash saucer and space aliens were allegedly observed. Following the series of dummy tests, a human subject, test pilot Captain Joseph Kittinger Jr., now a retired colonel, made 3 parachute jumps from high-altitude balloons. Since free-fall tests from these unprecedented altitudes were extremely hazardous, they could not be accomplished by a human until a rigorous testing program using anthropomorphic dummies was completed. And this is the picture of that. I'll read the caption. Figure 25, Lord, take care of me now, were Captain Joseph W. Kittinger Jr.'s words as he exited the Excelsior 3 balloon gondola at 102,800 feet on August the 16th, 1960, over White Sands Proving Ground, New Mexico. Kittinger's courageous scientific achievement remains to this day the highest parachute jump ever accomplished. A cover-up. Countering claims of a cover-up, Air Force projects that used anthropomorphic dummies and human subjects were unclassified and widely publicized in numerous newspapers and magazine stories, books, and television reports. These included a book written by test pilot Kittinger, The Long, Lonely Leap, another book, Man High, by Man High project scientist Lieutenant Colonel David G. Simmons, MC, a feature article in National Geographic, and cover stories in Life, Collier's, Popular Mechanics, and Time. A characterization of Kittinger's record parachute jump even appeared in the adolescent magazine Mad. The intense public interest in high dive, Excelsior, and other aeromedical projects conducted at Holloman Air Force Base also resulted in a 1956 20th Century Fox full-length motion picture, On the Threshold of Space. Oh my goodness. Dummy drop procedures. For the majority of tests, dummies were flown to altitudes between 30,000 and 98,000 feet, attached to a specially designed rack suspended below a high-altitude balloon. On several flights, the dummies were mounted in the door of an experimental high-altitude balloon gondola. Upon reaching the desired altitude, the dummies were released and free fell for several minutes before deployed of the main parachute. The dummies used for the balloon drops were outfitted with standard equipment of Air Force aircrew member. This equipment consisted of a one-piece flight suit, olive drab, gray. Witnesses had described seeing aliens in gray one-piece suits or fuchsia-colored boots and parachute pack. These dummies were also fitted with an instrumentation kit that contained accelerometers, pressure transducers, an oscillograph, and a camera to record movements of the dummy during free fall. Recoveries of the test dummies were accomplished by personnel from Holloman Air Force Base Balloon Branch. Typically, 8 to 12 civilian and military recovery personnel arrived at the site of an anthropomorphic dummy landing as soon as possible following impact. The recovery crews operated a variety of aircraft and vehicles. These included a wrecker, a 6x6 weapons carrier, an L-20 observation, and C-47 transport aircraft. The exact vehicles and aircraft described by the witnesses as having been present at the crash saucer locations. On one occasion, just southwest of Roswell, a high dive project officer, First Lieutenant Raymond A. Madsen, even conducted a search for dummies on horseback. To expedite the recoveries, crews were pre-positioned with their vehicles along the paved highway in the areas where impact was expected. On a typical flight, the dummies were separated from the balloon by radio command and descended by parachute. Prompt recovery of the dummies and their suspension racks which usually did not land in the same location, resulting in extensive ground and air searches, was essential for researchers to evaluate information collected by the instrumentation and cameras. To assist the recovery personnel, a variety of methods were used to enhance the visibility of the dummies: smoke grenades, pigment powder, and brightly colored parachute canopies. Also, recovery notices promising a $25 reward were taped to an exposed portion of a dummy. Local newspaper and radio stations were contacted with equipment when equipment was lost. The bravest man. America was introduced to Colonel John Paul Stapp on December the 10th, 1954, when he became known as both the bravest and the fastest man on Earth. Stapp earned these titles following a rocket sled test that accelerated him to 632 miles per hour. He reached this speed in just 5 seconds, faster than a .45 caliber bullet, and was decelerated to a stop in 1.4 seconds, subjecting his body to more than 42 times the force of gravity. While this was America's introduction to Colonel Stapp, the 1954 rocket sled test was examined aircraft restraint devices and human responses to accelerative and decelerative forces and wind blasts, was just one of many achievements of this legendary Air Force physician. Born in Bahia, Brazil, to American missionary parents, Stapp sold pots and pans door to door during the Depression while he earned both undergraduate and graduate degrees in zoology and chemistry at Baylor University. He went on to earn a doctorate in biophysics from the University of Texas and a doctorate in medicine from the University of Minnesota. In 1944, Stapp entered the U.S. Army Air Forces and became a flight surgeon. From 1946 to 1963, due to his unique qualifications in biophysics and medicine, he conducted a series of acceleration-deceleration experiments on the high-speed track at Muroc, now Edward Air Force Base, California, and later at Holloman Air Force Base, New Mexico. Developments from these and other studies resulted in innovations which have saved many lives. These included improved safety belt restraint systems and design specifications for aircraft and automobile ejection and emergency escape systems, refinement of automobile airbag systems, and development of modern anthropomorphic test dummy. As commander of the U.S. Air Force Aeromedical Field Laboratory at Holloman Air Force Base, New Mexico, and later the Aeromedical Laboratory at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, Ohio, Stapp won support for the Air Force manned high-altitude balloons project, Man High and Excelsior. As a testament to his thorough safety preparations, these and other extremely hazardous projects administered by Stapp did not result in a single debilitating injury to a test subject. These projects helped pave the way for future flights of both high-altitude aircraft such as the X-15 and of spacecraft for the Mercury, Gemini, and Apollo programs. In fact, Stapp's expertise was called upon to assist the selection of the initial cadre of astronauts, the Mercury 7. He retired from the Air Force in 1970, but not before amassing a collection of awards and honors. These included 2 awards of the Legion of Merit for rocket and sled experiments, the Cheney Award for 1954, and membership in the National Aviation Hall of Fame. In association with the Society of Automotive Engineers, Stapp continues to participate in annual conferences in which industry experts assemble to discuss vehicle safety issues. The conferences, now in their 40th year, bear his name, the Stapp Car Crash Conferences. In 1991, in recognition of a lifetime of unselfish dedication to scientific research, Stapp was awarded the National Medal of Technology, bestowed upon him at the White House by President George Bush. He is married to the former Lillian Laness, a former soloist with the Ballet Theater of New York, and resides in Alamogordo, New Mexico. At 87 years old, he continues to maintain a dizzying pace of travel and lectures. It is not an exaggeration that virtually every person who has safely operated or ridden in an automobile, aircraft, or spacecraft has been benefited from the genius of Colonel John Paul Stapp and owes this brave scientist, physician, and visionary a great deal of thanks. Despite these efforts, the dummies were not always recovered immediately. One was not found for nearly 3 years, and several were not recovered at all. When they were found, the dummies had instrumentation, were often damaged from impact. Damage to the dummies included loss of heads, arms, legs, and fingers. This details dummies with missing fingers appears to satisfy another element of the research profile, aliens with only 4 fingers. Here's the picture. Okay, let's read it. Page and sticks together. What may have contributed to a misunderstanding in the dummies were viewed by persons unfamiliar with their intended use were the methods used by Holloman Air Force Base personnel to transport range locations in wooden shipping containers similar to caskets to prevent damage to fragile instruments mounted in and on the dummy. Also, canvas military stretchers and hospital gurneys were used, a procedure recommended by a dummy manufacturer to move these dummies in the laboratory or retrieve dummies in the field after a test. The first 10 dummy drops also utilized black or silver insulation bags similar to body bags, in which the dummies were placed for flight to guard against equipment failure at low ambient temperatures of the upper atmosphere. On one occasion, northwest of Roswell, a local woman unfamiliar with the test activities arrived at a dummy landing site prior to the arrival of the recovery personnel. The woman saw what appeared to be a human embedded headfirst in a snowbank and became hysterical. The woman screamed, "He's dead, he's dead." It now appeared that anthropomorphic dummies dropped by high altitude balloons satisfied the requirements of the research profile. However, the review of high altitude balloon operations revealed what appeared to be explanations for some other sightings of odd objects in deserts and skies of New Mexico. Oh my goodness. Well, we will stop there for now to part 1.3, which will be called High Altitude Balloon Operations, page 37. And that is the Roswell Report. Isn't this crazy? This is really, really fascinating. So we will put a stop today there for the Roswell Report. I forgot to put. And here is my shout out, is my painting. This is a painting. My uncle happened to own a house in New Mexico, and he always puts up a lot of decorations. And this is a painting I did of his decorations. It makes me very happy to see that. He goes all out. He was doing it long before it was a thing. He was like probably one of the very first people to do it up. You could see his house from space. How about that? And this is my product placement. How else am I going to get my back washed? I bought this at Burlington Coat Factory. I bought a new one. I usually would buy this at the Dollar Tree, but the Dollar Tree is going out of business. So I spent an extra couple of dollars and bought this at Burlington Coat Factory, but it's a much better quality. Like the handle doesn't feel like it's going to break on me, and this is much more tightly wound. The other ones don't last very long, so that's that. I hope you're having a wonderful day. I'm so glad that you're here, and we will pick up more on this tomorrow morning. I should be able to read a little more. I can't put this down. This is crazy good, isn't it? Fascinating stuff, because you know the whole balloon incident, which was blamed on China. Apparently there's been balloons over many other countries throughout the world, they weren't just floating them over America. Apparently there's been balloon sightings throughout other countries, and they're blaming it on China, I guess. I don't know. We'll never know. They'll never tell us the truth, but they are out there, and the truth is out there. Okay. So I hope you have a wonderful, wonderful day. And if you leave me a comment or something in the chat, I will go check your channel out. And I always sub for sub and watch for watch. That's how I grow my channel. And give me a kiss. Okay, my friend, take care today. Bless, bless.